He's making a statement of his theme, which is that if you fight against it hard enough, evil will actually destroy itself. And in fact, at the end, when Frodo is there about to throw the ring in, he doesn't do it. He fails, actually. But that's not the point. The point is that he got it there. That's enough. And then Gollum is dancing around and falls in.
Gollum takes care of it.
And Gollum takes care of it because the evil destroys itself.
Welcome back to the Wax Quill Podcast. Woohoo!
Welcome back, my friends. Today I have once again Dr. Erik Goodwyn. How are you?
Hello, hello.
We're actually filming this, full disclaimer, in October, but this isn't going to come out until about March, right when your book is coming out, which we talked about last time. So any updates with that? Any fun news?
A lot of the arcs or reviews are coming in now on Goodreads. I'm up to, I don't know, 11 or 12 reviews there. So that's fun. Yeah. And these are the ones that the publisher has been sending out. So that's exciting.
That's good. So does that make a big difference? I imagine the publisher wouldn't do that unless it made a...
If you can make an impact on Goodreads, then that's publicity and people will want to read it based on that. Like the ratings are good, and they are so far.
Right.
Yeah. And they'll do that with other sites too, like Amazon. The biggest challenge for a new book is to get people to read it. Right? Because a relative nobody, if you're a debut author, they don't know who you are. And so that the more people read it, the better.
So I have a question then, because technically you've already published books, but they've been in the nonfiction space. So
that's true. Yeah.
Are you having to start completely from zero then?
I don't think so. No, because the people that are familiar with my scholarly work, especially in a lot of the circles where I publish and give lectures, is in kind of the Jungian psychology group. And they're very big into mythology and folk tales and everything else. So it's a natural fit. There's actually, I'm not the only Jungian who writes fiction. There's a few others out there too. And it seems like there's more and more of it these days. But there's something about that particular style of approach to psychology that lends itself to works of fiction or other artistic exploits and explorations.
That sounds cool. Okay, so what is Jungian then? I thought I knew what it was, but now I'm thinking I don't.
It's a type of, it grew out of the psychoanalytic school of Sigmund Freud and some of those old school guys. And Carl Jung is the founder of it. And he was very big into mythology, and he proposed that a lot of the similarities that you see in myths around the world are due to the fact that we all have very similar unconscious makeup. So he called it the collective unconscious, and he felt that the myths that you see around the world and folk tales follow these patterns that he called archetypes, and they have profound meaning in them. The myths have a profound level of psychological truth to them. And so those themes will oftentimes appear in people's dreams. And if you know what you're looking for, you can use that to help a person get through whatever challenges they're dealing with. So you may have heard of sand tray therapy. No? Okay. It's a tray of sand, and it's used oftentimes with children. And there's little toys and things that you get them to create a little scene on the sand tray to help express whatever emotional challenge they're dealing with. That came out of Jungian psychology as well. So there's a whole lot to it. But I think it's the connection between art and folk tales and mythology that makes people who are interested in Jungian psychology explore that side of themselves, which we encourage people to do in therapy as well. I always tell people, draw, write, create poetry or whatever, just because the stuff they're dealing with will come out in the symbolism of it, which I put into the story, into King of the Forgotten Darkness.
Interesting. Okay, so let's segue into theme, because that's what I wanted to talk about. So I sent you an email, but watchers, you don't know, we were talking about this book, this one, and Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And I was asking him about a quote that's in here, and I wrote it in here. It says, plotting a compelling and engaging novel and crafting a story where the hero is a lot like playing psychologist. It's your job not only to diagnose the real problem in your hero's life, but to cure it as well. And I was like, oh, I know a psychologist. So I sent you an email like, hey, tell me about this. So
That's
Tell
a
me
great way
about
to
it.
put that. Now, John Truby's work is really excellent as well. Anatomy of Story. Robert McKee is another one. There's a bunch of them.
Mhm.
But I think that's a great way to put it because what you're doing with your theme is theme. You want to separate theme from subject matter. When you ask somebody, what's the theme of your story? A lot of times people will answer, it's about grief. And that's not really a theme. That's a subject matter. If it's to be a theme, it needs to be saying something about grief. It's a truth that you feel passionately about, that you feel is true, that you want to shine through your story. So you want to say that the best way through grief is to learn to accept your flaws, learn to accept the person is gone, or find a way to reconnect with them even after they're gone. Then you use that to essentially create the spine of your story that everything else revolves around. I can give you my process for how I came up with that
Yes.
theme for King of Forgotten Darkness and for other books in the series, some of which are already written actually. But that's
That's so
another story.
exciting. Ugh.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
before you
another.
do that, let's put a pause there because I have a writing question. How were you able, did you just trudge away at all those books? And then once they were finished, did you query the first one?
You mean the writing of them?
Yes.
Uh, it's nowhere near as straightforward as that. It's more like I've had these stories bouncing around in my head for very many years, and some of them I actually was able to finish writing, and then I queried, I tried, I went down that path. But the fact of the matter was, at that time, and we're talking 5, 10, 15 years ago. I've been at this for about 20 years. It's been a labor of love and kind of a pursuit. But when I queried books in the past, my skill wasn't up to snuff. It wasn't good enough. My craft was not there. That's the way I look at it. And yes, it was very competitive and it still is. It's worse than ever now. But you got to work on your craft. You have to. And it's really hard to do that. Most of the time, they're as mere mortals. We have to work hard at it and get it good. This book is the first in the chronology of the books that I've written so far about this. And I've written others that actually come later. But when I get to them, I'll have to polish them up because they're not as good as they could be.
Mm. How many books are there?
9.
Oh, wow, that's
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah. Hopefully I'll get to write them all.
Okay. All right, let's
That'll
get
take years to do, but here we are.
it will, but hey, it's worth it, right?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
worthwhile.
yeah.
Okay. Theme, your process for constructing your book around your theme.
Yes. Now, I will say one thing. Now, I'm a plotter, right? If you divide people up into plotters and pantsers, I'm really far on the plotting side, right? I love to plan it out in advance. I don't think this would necessarily work for everyone. Some people that write that are pantsers, they just write as they go. That's fully valid. It's not my style,
Mhm.
but some people are really good at that. And I think in their case, you still need a theme, only the process at getting to it won't be the way that I'm about to describe. It'll be
Mhm.
more emergent from what you're writing because the theme is probably in there anyway, right? That I fully recognize. Whether you're aware of it and you're like really going at it, or if it's just lurking in the unconscious and then it pops up eventually. And in reality, it works both ways. The way I came at it was I worked really hard at a theme that I think is a good one. And I use that then to develop the main character of the story because main characters should have a flaw. If you want to create a character arc anyway, they need a flaw that they overcome. And if you're going to work and orbit everything around a theme, then this is where you got to start.
Mhm.
So if the character's flaw is that they need to learn to open up more or something like that to other people. And then you have to write your character arc around what do they do in order to show that they've done that. So you start off by showing how that flaw is hurting themselves and hurting other people. And then you figure out through the plot what they have to do to not only learn that this is their flaw, but then act in such a way and do something concrete in their world to accomplish getting over the flaw and achieving victory at the end. Unless you're writing a tragedy. I'm a big fan of Shakespeare, for example, and many of those are tragedies. So we could use Hamlet. That's a great example. He can't make up his mind. That's his flaw. And he learns to act decisively, but too late. He's already set in motion things that destroy the entire kingdom. Pretty intense stuff. But he still learns it. Same thing with Macbeth, right? He learns that power, lusting after power, winds up destroying himself and pretty much everybody else around him, but it's too late. His wife's already killed herself, and all spoilers if you haven't seen Macbeth.
Yeah.
And everything else. Who hasn't? I don't know. But so that's an example there. With Star Wars, for example, Luke Skywalker has to learn to trust in the Force. And thankfully, for the rebellion, he learns it just in time to destroy the Death Star. But you'll notice that with him, learning to trust the Force boils down to a specific concrete act in the third act that he does, which is trust in the Force instead of using the computer and blowing up the Death Star. That's the way that he's able to show that he had accomplished his arc. Okay, so you start there, right? You got your main character's arc, but you got all kinds of other stuff to do, right? So then you need to, what's the antagonist? The antagonist is you take the flaw and you invert it, the main antagonist of the story. And you'll want more than just one main antagonist, because that'll be boring if it's just one person versus another person and they're just pounding on each other the whole time. But to connect it to the theme then, say, we'll use Star Wars again. So in that case, it's the Empire, which is they don't trust the Force at all. And they're just running amok and causing all kinds of destruction. And that's the way that the antagonist of the main character is tied into theme as well. Another thing that you tie to your theme too, before I get to that, you can see then here how the plot connects to the theme and the character, that they're all connected when you use it this way. See?
Yeah, it's like you're making the theme is the skeleton, and then you're adding on top of that.
Yeah, that's right. And all of your side characters then will have a different take on that theme. This is another method that you can use to tie everything together. I'm just trying to come up with a good example. We'll use Hamlet. Okay, so this indecision, this inability to decide on things. So the other characters that are in the play are connected to this theme as well. And different characters will have different levels of whether or not they're decisive, because what Shakespeare is doing is he's teetering on the edge here of how much indecision is too much, how much impulsivity is too much. And that's what the great complexity of the play is, because it's not an easy thing to answer. So those are the really juicy themes. The ones that don't have simple, straightforward answers, like do good, that's easy. Who doesn't argue with that? What does that mean? See? So that's how you can explore those things through your story. So then your side characters might have a slightly different take on your theme. Say if it's learning to open up to people. There's certainly people that will do that too much, and that leads them to all kinds of problems. And other people that can never do it. And that might be the antagonist, or it might be other characters. But if possible, you want to tie those all into your theme as well, to show rather than tell the complexity of the theme that you're working with. So your theme needs to be juicy enough to be able to handle this, meaning that it's got enough meat on it and there's a lot of things you can explore with it. War movies in general do a lot of exploring of the theme of whether or not, like, the things that you do in war are justified.
I can't handle them very well.
Yeah, they're pretty intense. Like Saving Private Ryan is a great example of this, where each character interaction in that, this is very well put together in terms of theme, is exploring this idea of sacrifice and how much sacrifice is enough. And if you're in a war, what's really allowed and what shouldn't be allowed. And if the enemy is behaving in a way that's horrible, does that justify me behaving in a horrible manner as well? Okay. And a really good story will not just tell us the answer to these questions, they'll show us through the actions of the characters. So that's where having a really good theme that you feel strongly about will help you develop your story and give it a lot of punch because you're dealing with these complex issues and emotionally intense issues.
Mhm.
Now, in fantasy, which is my chosen genre, you've got an additional tool. You want your setting to also feed into the theme if you can do it somehow. And I say fantasy gives you an additional tool because fantasy allows you to come up with anything you want. But because it's fantasy, you don't want it to just be anything. If you tie it to your theme, it makes the fantastical elements really powerful in the sense that a dream is. So dreams are expressions of our emotional reality. And that's why they can be so unforgettable. A good example of this would be Lord of the Rings, one of my favorites. There's a reason why you can't destroy the ring anywhere except Mount Doom. If you could destroy it by running it through a shredder or something at Walmart, that would just not have the same impact as
Mhm.
what Tolkien put together. And for him, the fire and the darkness and the doom and the gloom and everything are tied very much to what the ring represents, which is evil and temptation, right? By making them destroy it in that place, he's making a statement of his theme, which is that if you fight against it hard enough, evil will actually destroy itself. And in fact, at the end, when Frodo is there about to throw the ring in, he doesn't do it. He fails,
Mhm.
actually. But that's not the point. The point is that he got it there. That's enough. And then Gollum is dancing around and falls in,
Gollum
and
takes care of it. Mhm.
and Gollum takes care of it because the evil destroys itself.
Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. Quick thing. I now have a Patreon. It's actually a subscribe star, which is better for me. So if you want to have your name in the credits of these podcasts, if you want to support the channel, and if you want little updates weekly, monthly about what's going on behind the scenes, and if you want to be at the front of the line for podcast interviews, then go ahead, sign up, and I hope to see you. Okay, back to the episode.
This was very deliberate on Tolkien's part because he's a Catholic and his faith was very strong, and he felt that evil destroying itself was grace. The concept of grace in the Christian sense.
Mhm.
Right. And so you can see he wove that into his story through the use of the setting, the characters, and the arc, and even the symbols, all revolving around that theme that he was developing.
Mhm. So how do you choose a theme?
Mhm.
Okay, let me share some of my process. And
Yeah.
because this sounds amazing, and I think I'm really being stupid if I don't adapt this into my stories. Usually, my stories, and I'll just admit it, they come from someone else's story and something that I think, oh, they missed that opportunity. I wish that character was in this part doing this other thing. What if there was this completely different world? Make changes, but you have this character with this other problem. And so then I think, oh yeah, and I just daydream about that and then figure out a story and lots of things that I think are important and have an oomph. But now that I hear your process, I'm like, ugh, my way is very
Well,
elementary. I think I want to do
well,
that.
putting your theme to work like this is something that I've seen talked about in a lot of different of these like storytelling experts in their books and classes and all that kind of stuff. So it is fairly advanced. It's a little bit more than the usual, but okay, a theme, you've got to be passionate about your theme. It's got to be something that rings true to you. An example for Harry Potter, for example, is Rowling, I think, felt very strongly about motherhood. And so she incorporated statements about that, how the sacrifices of a mother will eventually win the day against all kinds of horrible, awful stuff. In King of the Forgotten Darkness, the theme I was working with was that of suffering. And how do we relate to that? Is it a good idea to eliminate all suffering? It seems like a good idea,
Mm-hmm.
but what might be the consequences of that if we did? And I mean, I could say it more explicitly than that, but I'd rather people read the story because it
Read it,
says it
guys. It's
better.
good.
And because a picture and an image is much more powerful. If I were to tell somebody that dithering around and not being able to make up your mind will lead to bad things happening to you, that's the theme of Hamlet. Yeah, being able to show the theme through the images and the actions of the characters is a whole lot more emotionally impactful and meaningful. So it gets the message across a whole lot. And all of the complexity too, because that's very difficult to verbalize. But getting back to your question, it sounds like you're developing your theme through the process that you're talking about. Like you're hearing a story and you're turning it around in your head and playing around with it and seeing the theme will emerge from that. Anything that conjures up strong feeling for you, follow that, right? Chase it down, see where it goes. What is that? What do I think is the truth behind this? And it doesn't have to be anything super profound. Some themes are quite simple. Some stories don't even have a theme. Like, I think I mentioned this before, like Ghostbusters. Like, what's the theme of Ghostbusters? I have no idea. Get rid of bad ghosts and have a good time. I don't know.
Have fun
But
with friends.
if, yeah, have fun with friends. Or 1001 Animes, which is the power of friendship defeats all bad things, that kind of stuff. Real simple. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fun. But if you want to try to, if you feel strongly about something that's a little bit more profound than that, then this is, I think, the way to go. Now, you smiled and laughed there when I said, when I was talking about your process. What was that about?
Oh, yes, that. I'm glad that there's hope for me. I love Lord of the Rings. I love the stories that you just think about over and over again. And every time you watch the movie, you learn something and you feel something and something different with different scenes that you never even noticed before. And it's just fills you up and makes you happy and sad at the same time. And I want my stories to do that. And I think in order to feel that, you have to be showing something that's true. I think truth is what makes you feel that way.
Absolutely.
And so I'm glad that, from what you said, it makes it sound like there's hope for my process. Even
Of
though,
course.
I don't know, I want to write good books, not just
Right.
good stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that people will return to more than once. And there's several ways that you can do that. You can leave the ending somewhat ambiguous. That can be frustrating. So that's a risk of that. But then people will talk about what is the meaning of this, and that's fun. Like Inception, is he still dreaming at the end of the movie or not? Great questions like that. But I think that having a theme is definitely a big part of getting what you're shooting for. Something that's got a timeless almost appeal. And like you said, absolutely couldn't agree more that it's got to come from a place of truth for you that you feel strongly about. This is your story, so you get to say what you think is true. This is the way that fiction is actually truer than reality because you're expressing a truth that you think it's a personal truth. And this is why I argue that fantasy has the tools to make it as sharply and clearly defined as you can get it, because you don't have to worry about physics or history, because it can be purely imagination. But having a theme and showing its complexities, I think, is what draw people to a story over and over again. And Tolkien's theme in Lord of the Rings is not a very simple one. It's one that people sometimes criticize it and say it's too rosy, too everyone wins at the end, la da. And to me, I'm like, did you read the book? Because the whole world loses all magic. That's a downer to me. So they're missing the point completely. But even on a deeper level, the statement is that evil can't be defeated without help from God, basically, from the divine. That's also dark too, if you think about it. You can't fight it on your own. That's scary. But if you hang in there and you keep fighting long enough and you resist, then you may be rescued at the end. What he called the eucatastrophe. I don't know if you've read any of his scholarly works, but
I haven't yet.
They're great. His essay on fairy stories is fantastic.
And it's interesting too, in Lord of the Rings, the small and simple things. It's not that all of the powerful elves band together and they charge the ring down to Mordor. It's the weak ones, and the weak ones have to suffer
Mhm.
and just keep one step forward, one step at a time,
Yeah.
trudging through it all with a bit of help here and there, but they're the ones bearing the brunt of the pain and
Mhm.
the difficulty.
And he set it up so that it could not be done any other way
Mhm.
because that was the story he wanted to tell. The problem with somebody like that is the temptation would be too much for someone who's already super powerful. And so he's made it to where only somebody who's humble and relatively weak could possibly defeat Sauron.
And that's what you said with fantasy being somewhat easier to show real truths, because you can put patches over these different possibilities that most people would think of. And nope, that they can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. There's only this way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
And if anybody argues with that, you can say it's magic.
Magic, yes. Interesting. So, how do you trim down? Did you choose a theme, and did that choice change as you were planning your book? Tell me about
Yeah.
that.
Oh, it does. The thing about a theme is it's ideally you should be able to say it in one sentence. But the problem, of course, is that it will be horribly incomplete in that state because the full expression of your theme should be your story
Mm-hmm.
as is. And the reader should be able to, if they put the effort into it, glean that from the events of the story, the character arcs, the setting, all of that stuff as an organic whole wrapping around your theme. And then your theme will emerge from that. And people will put it in different ways, depending on their own reading of it. I've had all kinds of reactions to it so far that it's just fascinating to me because some people will read it and say it's a really fun adventure. And other people will read it and they will clearly have gotten the deeper stuff that I was tackling in the story. And I like both. I don't mind. Either one is fine. Obviously, it's nice when people see the stuff you put in there on purpose. So that's cool. But nevertheless, as you're working on it, you will refine it, I think, as you go. And it'll become clearer and clearer, actually. Because a lot of times you start off with a theme, it'll be just a bunch of subjects. Like I said earlier, it'll be subject matter. I want to write something about power or evil or whatever. And then you'll say, all right, how am I going to develop a main character arc around that? And then as you do it, you're like, okay, so I've got something a little more specific about this now. And of course, make sure you've got some good writing partners that you can bounce these ideas off of too. If they are familiar with this terminology, it'll really help a lot because then they'll be able to say and give you really specific advice. That's very helpful. A lot of writers are out there going flying solo, and that's tough. I did that for years, and it's very hard.
How did you know that you had nailed your theme with the drafting and once you had written the book and were going through the process and you're like, yeah, I did it?
When everything falls together, you get it to where you keep working on it and you get to the point where it clicks and things will start to emerge from the process that add to what you're doing that you didn't really foresee before. And I think it's just a part of the creative process where the unconscious is what's doing most of the creative work. It's piling stuff together and creating stories all the time. That's what dreams are, and other spontaneous thoughts that just come out of nowhere, seemingly. The creative process is always working, of course. But then consciously, we'll take that stuff and we'll move it around and play around with it. And that process, that interplay there, I think, is where a lot of the real work gets done. And eventually you'll get to a point where you'll feel it. You'll say, yes, this is it. This is what I'm trying to say. So it's an intuitive thing. I'm sure somebody out there somewhere has come up with more rigid way of coming up with this, but I'm not like that. I feel like you'll know it when you get to it because the theme is in there. Like I said, it's in nascent form, right? Once you get it, it'll feel right because the characters will start moving along lines that emphasize your theme. Or you'll come up with a plot twist that shows it. And that's when you know you're on the right track. And it takes a while and a lot of work to get there. Sometimes the stories just fall together. And I've heard other authors say this, that things just fall together sometimes. And it's great if it happens. But the rest of the time, you have to just chip away at it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
William Goldman, who wrote Princess Bride, he said that story just wrote itself. It just all fell together. And that was the only time that's ever happened to him. And he's written a bunch of stuff, but that one really just fell together. If it happens, but I wouldn't expect that.
In practice, when you say just keep chipping away at it, does that mean, oh, writing another scene and then writing another scene because you're not sure about that other one, and then writing a new one and just like producing more words and picking and choosing from those? Or
No, I don't do that. Other people may do that, right? Your pantsers out there, they might do that. I can't do that. I have to have an outline. And the outline should express your theme because it'll have all the arcs together. And once I do that, the point at which things are falling together is that stage of the process for me. So I haven't really written any scenes yet. I've got a scene summary, like a list of more or less what happens in each scene, but not a whole lot of detail. That's the stage where I think most of this work gets done. What I call a scene list. That's from John Truby's work. Scene list, I'm listing all the scenes. I've got, say, a standard average length debut novel might have 45 to 60 scenes. At that stage, I'm looking through all the scenes and asking myself, is this where it needs to be? Is this where it needs to be? Does this fit with my theme? Are all the arcs falling in place? And I go through it a bunch of times with different questions in mind each time I go through it. I haven't written any scenes at that stage because I don't want to write a scene I'm going to have to erase later, but that's what you got to do. And that'll happen too when you write a scene and you'll find out, oh, later that I don't really need this scene. I've already covered that in this one. But that's later on. And I think that's not what you're talking about.
I'm just wondering, because there's lots of different phases of writing a book. You've got the kind of imagining, then, oh yeah, let me actually figure out the characters, the plot, mixing it all together, the second arc, the romance. Let's piece it all together, chop it up where it needs to go. And then comes the actual writing of it.
And the very last thing is dialogue. Save that to the very end.
Man, I wish there was a mathematic formula for writing a good book. But it seems like theme needs to be.
I think the best treatment of this that I've come across is Dara Marks's book Inside Story. You should check that out after you're done with Save the Cat. It's really well done. And she is focusing more on screenplay writing, but it doesn't matter because novel writing is actually a little bit easier than screenplay writing because you've got more space to play with. And they're very strict when it comes to screenwriting. Really strict about structure, which is fine. But I think when you're writing a novel, you don't have to be quite as strict. But having read that stuff about being super strict about structure, I think gives you more tools to work with. So you know what the rules are so you can break them here and there intentionally rather than unintentionally. That's really important. But yeah, that book really gets at a stepwise process on how to construct the plot, the characters, all of that stuff around your theme.
Wonderful. With your 9-book series, do you have the same theme for the whole thing, or do you pick a theme per book?
Yes, both.
Explain.
So the theme for the entire thing, I don't want to have you could write a series where each book has its own theme, but that the series as a whole doesn't really have a theme. And that would be fine. But it would not be what I want to do. I want to have the whole thing feel like an organic whole. And the only way to do that is to connect the same theme throughout them all. But it has to be a theme that's challenging enough that you can look at it from many different angles and express the theme is a statement that you believe to be true. But that doesn't mean there's not a ton of nuance to it, right? So you want something like that. And then the nuances are what you can explore in the microcosm of each individual story. That makes sense?
That does make sense.
Yeah.
So with Lord of the Rings, the whole trilogy is about evil will destroy itself.
If you work hard enough, right? That's one way to express the theme of
Mhm.
Lord of the Rings. There's probably other ways, I'm sure. But in that story, it's all one book. It's not really 3 books
Mhm.
because that's how he wrote it. And the
Right.
publisher wanted him to break it up because they can sell more books that way, which is fine. I mean,
I didn't know that.
we've got
Hmm.
one of the greatest, book trilogies of all time as a result. So I'm not complaining, but each individual book doesn't really have its own separate theme. They did this a little bit in the movies. They added a little bit to give each movie its own kind of theme. For example, they added the character arc for Aragorn, who initially was reluctant to step into his role as king. But then
Mhm.
at the end, as he's inspired by Boromir's death, he says, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that's great. That's really awesome. But it's not in the book.
In the book, he's always gung ho about it. If I,
In the book, he knows he's up against a major challenge, but he doesn't ever doubt that he's
Mhm.
the guy to do it, which is cool. You've got two great viewpoints on that.
And in the second book, you have with Frodo, at least, and Sam, you have like how closely can we get to evil without being destroyed by it? Can evil be redeemed?
Yeah,
And not in this case.
no, not in this case. That's
Yeah.
true. Now, other books, I'm trying to think. The First Law series by Joe Abercrombie is another version of that, where it's really all just one story.
Mm.
And each book doesn't have its own separate sub-theme. But there's 2 reasons why I wanted it to do it this way, where each book has its own sub-theme as well. One of them is very practical, and that is being a debut author. Most publishers or agents don't care if you have a multi-book saga planned out because everybody and their monkey's uncle is like that. Okay. So they're like, yeah, whatever. We want to see if this first book is going to be worth a hill of beans and then come talk to us.
Mhm.
And I can't blame them for that. It's very competitive. Now you've got self-publishing, which makes it even more competitive. All well and good, but at the same time, that's a really good reason to make sure your first book is a self-contained unit and not a cliffhanger, because that's just going to make people mad.
Mhm.
And so you maybe noticed that when you read King of Forgotten Darkness, that it does have a conclusion, but
Mhm.
it's open to other things happening down the
It's
road.
very open.
Yeah. So that's the sweet spot you have to do if you've got a multi-book series planned.
Mhm.
Is what they call it is the standalone with sequel possibilities. But I also wanted each book to have its own separate theme that I'm going to explore that's related to the overarching theme.
So it sounds like you're going at them one by one.
Mhm.
In that case, if it's supposed to be, let's say, a trilogy, not quite 9 books long, is it better to write it as a single book? Or should you just take a piece of it?
I don't think either one is right or wrong. Like it's all according to if you want to do the Tolkien / Abercrombie route and say, I've got one theme that I want to develop with one story that I'm just breaking up into 3 parts. That's fine. If you want each book to have its own theme, like Harry Potter's like that, each book has its own kind of individual thing that it's dealing with. And then the overarching theme kind of comes through of all 7 of those.
Mhm.
And again, part of this is because of Rowling didn't know that her series was going to take off. So she had to do this for the first one. And I think if you propose a trilogy, that's one thing. If you say, I've got 11 books in a massive series, unless your name is Brandon Sanderson, you're not going to be able to do that.
He's a unicorn.
And my name is not Brandon Sanderson.
Mhm.
But he's in a place where he can do that kind of thing, where he can have a monster series and each book is 900 pages. And that's great for him. That's awesome. He's a very strict plotter. incidentally.
He's so cool. It sounds like, okay, I want some advice from you. And then I have some questions to ask. Some more of them that maybe are not quite so relevant, but it sounds like you're very good at, you've studied theme for a long time. It sounds like you're able to watch something like a movie or read a book and say, oh, here's the theme. They're showing this and this. You're able to analyze it quickly. How much analyzing do I need to do? If you were to give me a homework assignment to get better at recognizing theme, what would it be?
I would say go through your favorite movies, because movies can be consumed rather quickly compared to books, and see if you can figure out what the theme is, and see if it connects to the main character's arc, for example. Not all of them will do this, but most of them will. And then you also look for, this is your second part of the assignment, is look for the side characters, because I seem to surprise you with that idea that your side characters should also express your theme. See how they do it. See how the side characters express the theme, or don't. Sometimes they don't. So maybe that would be a good assignment.
Okay.
Thank you. And usually the more artsy a movie is, the more likely it's going to be something like this that follows theme and has this coherence to it, because the writers that's what they're going for. They want something that's really powerful and timeless. And these ideas, this idea of theme and having the things all connected, this goes all the way back to Aristotle, right? This is not new. So artists have known this for a long time. So there's your assignment.
Okay. Sounds good.
Very curious to see what you come up with.
I will let you know in
Yeah,
our
I'm
next
curious to see
episode.
what movies you pick, and see if you feel like the theme is the same as what I think it is. Because it's not, there's a right or wrong answer necessarily.
Your answer should be exactly what the author said. But then again, people's
It's not always
perceptions
going to.
really change that.
That's the beauty of this art form, I think. You can write something and that's what it means to you. But then somebody else will come along and they'll get something very different out of it. I've already had that with King of Forgotten Darkness, and it's okay, that's an interesting take. I can see why you came up with that. That wasn't what I was thinking, but whatever.
So cool. Stories are so cool.
They are.
Okay.
I think the author creates a gift to readers to then do something with themselves. That's a really cool thing. We do that in therapy too. So,
have I ever told you about Book Boot Camp?
Book Boot Camp.
I'll tell
I don't
you.
think so.
So I was like, I've noticed that I know a lot of people who really want to write a book, but they're just struggling to get just the first draft done. And I feel like that's a lot of the work, is just getting that one finished.
Oh, yeah.
So since I have completed several first drafts, I was like, what if I share some knowledge and have like little weekly meetings, like a structured writing partner / lesson thing. So I had it for 2 months, for October and November. And so I asked some of my students / writing partners some questions for you. Did you use an editor for your new book, or did you just self-edit?
I self-edited this one. Others that I have written in the series, I had edited.
Okay.
But now the publisher also has an editor that they use. So I guess it's not as easy to answer really, because a lot of people have had their eyes on it. But for the most part, I did most of the editing myself.
Gotcha. Do you think that's typical for a debut novel?
Yeah, probably. Now, self-publishers are strongly advised to hire a professional editor, because not going through a traditional publishing house means you won't have that. And I was able to get mine professionally edited. But I didn't have to pay for it. So that's the advantage of that. Because it can be expensive, but if you're self-publishing, it's part of the investment.
Yeah.
As I understand it.
I've written a few children's books. Those are the ones I'm pushing out first because they're short. So I sent those to 2 different editors, 2 different books. And then it's less than 300 words each. But then you see their quotes for, oh, every 500 words is this much. And I'm looking at those thinking, ooh, that's going to be a hefty sum for a big novel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next book is, how many drafts did you have for this current book?
Oh God. The first draft of this book of King of the Forgotten Argus, not only that's not the first title. I've went through bazillion titles. The first draft goes back to the 90s. And that's how long I've been fiddling with this story. I would stop, write other books, come back to it later, do it complete ground zero rewrites, probably 15, maybe 20. But I will say that was part of my journey. I wouldn't think that everyone has to do that. All right, you learn the craft first, and because I just went gung ho into it early on, and I look at myself now and I'm like, that's somebody walking in and saying, I'm going to write a symphony, and they don't know how to play an instrument. That's how much of a task and you don't realize it. You think, well, I could do this. So,
How hard could it possibly be?
all right, piece of cake. I don't know anything about harmony or reading music or anything, but I'm just going to go for it.
All right. Let's see. Last question. When you felt discouraged with your writing, what helped you to push through and get it done?
If I hit a brick wall, like where I would just go, I did not want to work on this today. That's true. What I would do is essentially make a bargain with myself. I would say, okay, self, I know you don't feel like writing, but another part of you says you do want to write. So just write one sentence and then you can be done for the day. And that's a trick that worked probably 90% of the time because I'll write one sentence and I'll be like, I can add one more to this. And then the energy gets going and the creative energy comes through and pushes through the blah, the lack of motivation. Other things that I would use as tricks would be having a schedule, like the specific time that I'm focusing on this, clearing my schedule for 1 hour, I'm doing this. And even if it's just staring at the screen, but then that would be when I would say, okay, you've cleared an hour, you really don't feel like doing this, just write your one sentence. And then I would do it. But there were other times when I would get very discouraged because I would send out lots of queries and I'd get nothing but form rejections and people wouldn't even look at it. And I looked back now and I know that it was because my skill level wasn't where it needed to be yet, which is okay. It's a skill, it's not like a personal attack. You got to get over that. That's for amateurs. Professionals develop their skills. So once I got to that point, well, I had been through many phases of rejections, tons of that, and I would get really discouraged and just say, I'm just going to say the hell with this for a while. Maybe I'll come back to it. Maybe I won't. I don't know. And I think there are those of us out there that will just never be able to let it go. And I'm one of those. And I would come back to it and go, okay, let's see if I can get this better. Sometimes it would be months or even years in between those. But that's the journey. Luckily, I have a day job, so I'm all right.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about your book that's coming out soon?
It is. Yeah, it is. So far, I've gotten a lot of great feedback. I'm very excited. And that's what's got me working on the sequels because I think if we get enough excitement for it, then the publisher's going to be like, I've gotten other publishers come to me actually, and I have to say no now because I've already agreed to this other publisher. But I think it's a good sign. These were queries I'd sent out before I'd agreed to publish with Roundfire Books. So one way or the other, I think I'll be all right. Get to move on. But yeah, get a copy, read it. You'll love it.
It's an excellent book.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll have to talk again soon.
Name and time. I'll be
Okay.
there.
Go write your books, people.